Welcome back to New Persuasive Words. I'm Scott Jones.
And I'm Bill Bohr. On this
They
very
seek him
cold,
here, Bill. They seek him here. They seek him there. Those Frenchies seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven or is he in hell? That damned, elusive Pimpernel. Bill, I think of you and I as podcasting Pimpernels, just running around the podcast sphere. Look, we're not as big as Joe Rogan or Ben Shapiro, but we're running around righting wrongs
there we
as
are.
we see fit with our virtual sabers, our virtual masks, our virtual scarlet cloaks. And that's what we're here for. We're on the wall
Very good.
for our listeners, for the public, for our people. And
Yes.
here we are jumping into 2025, not walking, not sauntering. We're jumping, we're running, we're hopping and jumping and skipping in place. And this is a good day to be alive. Here we are.
But we're doing this inside because it's very cold outside.
You're damn right we're doing it. I don't record outside unless it's 75 degrees and zero humidity, which means San Diego.
San Diego.
Yeah. Although I would, I'll tell you, we didn't get to do it last time, but next time you're in Philly, I want to go back to the world famous deli. That was
Right.
We had good energy there.
We did 4th Street Deli. Yeah, it was our schedule was tight, but we'll be back and we'll do the 4th Street.
I want to do it in McGillen's the next time.
Right.
McGillen's, it's just and we could go in the footsteps of Joe and Mika. Although we won't go to Mar-a-Lago.
No, we will not. We will not bend a knee. I was there for that.
I know. I almost went. I should have gone with you.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, it was fun. But that's about when they peaked for me, right there.
Now they're down there eating the
chocolate cake.
The chocolate cake in Mar-a-Lago. I always picture Mar-a-Lago as sort of like the Union League, overrated food wise. I have eaten
the Union League.
I have had good meals privately, like in the actual restaurant. But if you go with the catering, I've been to events, like big events at the Union League, and I think the big event food is to be, it's not to die for. It is not outstanding.
But they do not water down their drinks at the Union League.
They do not. They do not. And it's a beautiful symbol of if you're anti-Confederacy. It's one of the great. It was started in the 1860s to raise money for the Union, and so
and there's all kinds of great. Back, remember when the Republican Party was for the Union? Remember
it was a Republican bastion then.
Right.
Yeah, we used to call them Republican Classic.
There we go. Yeah. So it's it is a monument to a bygone era on a number of fronts, but it's a cool place to go. Yeah.
Definitely go there if you're. If you're a listener,
you have to be invited.
You and I have gotten in with members clearing me. So if you become a sponsor of the show for a mere $10 a month, Bill and I will make the phone calls necessary to get you in the Union League. I mean, what you're getting out of this show. Look, the inane Methodist podcasters, they don't offer anything like this.
But we do wish them well.
We wish them well. We wish them well.
We do pray for them.
Solicit your prayers. We solicit your prayers. And we've given them so much as far as material, and now we give them our prayers as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, you sent me a couple ideas, and I like what we're going to talk about here today.
We are going to talk about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
Yeah, right. Yeah, a fascinating figure. Again, it was funny. You were, I did the deep dive on him. I can't remember why, but about 20 plus years ago. So there are a lot of cobwebs you're shaking out of my head as you send me stuff. But by
the way, I remember one time when I was taking a sociology class with Tony Campolo, he gave an entire lecture. Well, I mean, it was like a lecture. It was an advanced seminar. There was only 15 people, but he just lectured like we were 1,500.
Right.
I had a friend from Sierra Leone. He was from seminary, and he went to go preach at the East Liberty Presbyterian homeless shelter there in the east end of Pittsburgh. and there were 4 guys waiting for their soup and their sandwich, and he said, "You're only 4, but I preach to you like you're 4,000." And he did about 4,000, about 40 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
A long time to wait for mediocre soup and a
yeah,
sandwich.
yeah. No, I've had that assignment before, and they have always been my shortest sermons.
Yeah, I mean,
Appreciating the audience, but anyway.
Why can't you eat during the sermon?
It's good that they feed people. There's some challenging dynamics, but that goes back all the way back to the social gospel people, right? That back during the day when you could have a liberal social gospel rescue mission across the street from a fighting fundamentalist rescue mission doing the same work, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Did you see that, Bill? I just switched our whole
I saw
angle.
that. Yeah, I know. I should have had my makeup person come
in. I just did this right on the lark.
Yeah, look at
this
that.
is very exciting for our listeners that are
I think I look better from distance. Like that's why I like preaching, from the pulpit
in a cathedral. As opposed
to
you don't rope off the back, you rope off the front.
The front, right. Yeah, it's better that way. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have a cathedral as close as you get in Southern Vermont. Yeah.
We should say, by the way, our listeners, we'd love to hear from you. And please, you can reach us on the podcast landing page. There's there's email links and stuff. We love hearing from you, especially if you have feedback about Bill. We love that. And I usually read the email to Bill. I do my best to read it in character.
Right.
So if you have tonal things like angry here, cynical here, deriding sigh, things like that, put those in parentheses. But also, sometimes we had one of our favorite episodes of the year, at least, has been from a listener who asked us for some support in her own graduate endeavors with her interlocutors, and we had a blast doing it. And so please reach out to us. And no topic is too big, no fee is too big, as they say.
Yeah, Ghostbusters, right? So, Chardin, so tell us what got you onto this topic.
It was our dear friend A.A. Hart, who is, I'll just say, the kinder of the 2 Hart brothers. I mean, they're both, I'm sure, exceedingly kind, but I can only speak to them.
He does publish very thoughtful stuff.
All the supernatural virtues went to one part of the family.
Yeah.
Hey, look, look, I believe in original sin, but I don't think we all sin equally. And so
he pointed you to an article in Christian Century.
Yeah, quite a good summary.
By the way, if I was going to pick a century to call Christian, I think I'd take a big pass on the 20th. And the 21st isn't looking much better. That's just me.
Well, it was a good growth year, good growth century, though, right?
Well, it was. It looked really good for a liberal Protestantism when they started. Yeah, but it
was a good century for original sin. Total depravity.
It was a great century for total depravity. Right.
Great century for Stalin
and others. Right. Yeah. Yeah. But and one thing, we have not podcast. We also should mention before we jump in the death of Jimmy Carter.
Death of Jimmy Carter. Yeah, and one of the great presidents of our century.
I think he was a wonderful soul of the Christian century, right? And in many ways, a high watermark for a number of different things. We can critique what happened during his presidency, and it's what I always.
How about the Iranians holding the hostages until the inauguration?
Amazing. And perhaps what the Reagan people had to do with that. That's one of many nefarious things they did behind the scenes in foreign policy. But I mean, I always joke, you're in trouble if you put an engineer in charge of something. And they're so bright, they're so good at what they do, but sometimes when they're managing projects, that's a different thing. And managing,
but also, don't you think though, Bill, like so much of the Carter stuff is the hand you're dealt. You're dealt an energy crisis. You're dealt inflation.
You're dealt post Watergate, post
Watergate. There's just so much that, and also the tone he again. These are the ironies of history. That he's not the conservative favorite, right? he's a liberal hero, not the. You would think. I mean, I re-listened to the Malaise speech and then listened to a podcast about it. You would think the conservatives would cheer this on. This sort of moral Jeremiah he gives the country and saying it's not about energy prices, inflation. It's about moral rectitude or the lack thereof, and identifying ourselves by what we buy and what we own and not who we are. I mean, this is prophetic stuff. And then Reagan comes along and says, hey, look, it's morning in America. Okay, here we go. I mean, and all of a sudden, my Reagan became a Trump there.
Yeah,
and I can't. So, but you know, I mean, Reagan came in and preached kind of the gospel of upbeat consumerism, right? I mean, in some sense, this no, look, I'm not taking away from Reagan's resilience on the Cold War and things like that, but this was not.
But the Soviet bloc was going to collapse anyway. But yeah, it's interesting that certainly.
I like how you say that. That's like when George Costanza says DeSoto was his favorite explorer. Jerry says, "What did he discover? The Mississippi." Like they wouldn't have found that anyway.
Right. No, I do think. They never were. It never was about virtue. It never with the Reagan.
And I think for certain people, look, there were certain Reaganites who were believed in virtue and more rectitude and things like that.
All right,
but that was not. If you look historically, that was not. It's not like Reagan stood up to the godless liberal.
No,
he stood up to the born again Christian and said, "A little much, a little too on the nose." People want to feel good. People want to feel good. Americans like to feel good. And if you look at the people that are two-termers recently, you look at Reagan, you look at Clinton, you look at Obama. Bush doesn't quite fit the mold on this president because he was a wartime president. Yeah. But they're people that like to make Americans feel good about America and being American, right? I mean, in general, I know people made a lot about Obama's apology tour or whatever, but at the end, Obama was not somebody that was someone that decried America's original sins, like his pastor Jeremiah Wright, who he had to denounce.
No, well, they're all American exceptionalist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're all. It's just a different version of them, which is, I think, the universal problem with all of them. But
I'm an American exception. I think some of our listeners are some of the most exceptional Americans.
There we go.
Out there. And not all of them love you, but that's
why you get the love look. No, but I do think Jimmy Carter. Again, I mean, I agree with all of his ideas, and I think he did cross the line sometimes in his doing foreign policy. But his
people don't like people that give presidential addresses in sweaters. It's not good luck.
I like bringing the blue jeans back, man.
No one respects a cardigan. I'm just tell you, it's just not something.
But,
I mean, Mr. Rogers, you like it, but do you want Mr. Rogers
with the nuclear codes?
No.
But again, I think he was the first president I voted for. I voted for him in 1980. I couldn't vote in 78. I was only 18 at that point, and they hadn't changed the law yet. But I did remember, like, for our civics or American honors, American history, I can't remember, whatever it was. We had to, my buddy and I got chosen to debate two other people. We were Gerald Ford, and they were the Clinton. This is 1976, and his job was to, my buddy's job was to learn Ford, and mine was to learn Carter to critique him. And we won the debate, but he converted me. Learning Carter, if I could have voted in 2016, I would have voted, or I mean, 1976, I would have voted for him, and I did in 1980. So it was interesting researching him, what he stood for. There you go. If you want the original sin of Billboard's politics, it might have been that history class in 1976. Yeah.
Can you imagine how sane American politics were when your choices were Gerald Ford or Jimmy Carter?
Oh my goodness!
This is an era of sanity we could not.
What about Adlai Stevenson and Dwight David Eisenhower? here. I mean, my goodness.
Where Adley Stevenson is making the ad and he just critiques the own ad, telling the people that it's all fake and staged in a New York studio.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Oh,
So
it's fantastic.
anyway,
By the way, one other passing we should note: Richard Hayes just died.
Yeah. So that,
One of the deans of New Testament scholarship of the generation.
yeah.
I mean, he was absolutely maybe one of the top, if not the top, American New Testament scholar of the generation, and a super interesting guy. His son, who I knew his son at Princeton, really good guy. His son is a Hebrew Bible scholar, and they wrote a book that we should talk about at some point on same-sex marriage and relationships. And where famously Hayes kind of changed his mind. Hayes was every conservative's favorite mainline Bible scholar. They could say he doesn't even believe Paul wrote Titus, and he and he thinks this stuff is verboten. So, I bet a really interesting story that people tell that apparently when he would give the inaugural lecture at the chapel when people were coming in, he'd say, "Some of you here because you want to teach college. Some of you here because you want to save the church. Some of you here because this. I want you to take a piece of paper and just write this down. It's about God," and then just periodically pull that out of your pocket and look at it. And I think that's fantastic.
Good. Yeah. All right. Well done.
There we go. So there you go. And today we're back. We're back to it's Saturday morning on Shabbos. Good Shabbos, by the way, to all of you who will hear this after sundown. Some of Bill's greatest fans won't be watching this because they're observant, and but we'll send them the link. And so many fans, Bill. So many fans. I have hardly any fans. That you have the torrent of listeners that have feedback about you, that just they hang on everything, like you say, like it's the Torah.
There we go.
It's like your Rebbe Bill Borowitz.
Yeah. There we are.
Okay, so let's go back to Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit who recently had completed a doctorate in paleontology at the Sorbonne, my alma mater, back in the glory days of 1922. I mean, what was left of the Sorbonne in 22? I don't know. And during his last weeks of Lent in 1922, you always got to watch what happens in the last weeks of Lent.
Yeah.
You're just getting through. You gave up your meat. You're not having sherry. You feel great. He receives from Father Joseph Subtil of the Jesuit Scholasticate in Belgium. Never got the Scholastic.
Never good when you get that letter, right?
Doesn't it sound like something out of Star Wars? He wanted Teilhard de Chardin to address his students on the topic of transformism and to include a discussion of primates. So in the course of the discussion that followed the lecture, he stated his views on original sin. And then he was asked by Father Louis Ratinger. We're really getting into the weeds here.
We are, man.
This is advanced stuff. This is teaching company level stuff.
Yeah.
So Ratinger, who was a theologian on the Anglian faculty, was asking, this is where it all goes awry. Would you make a little written summary of your views? That's where you say no. There's no TikTok, there's no Instagram, there's no YouTube, there's no podcast. This is buried for posterity. But he does do this, and it's funny. He seems to have not kept a copy of this. And the note is the title of his written response is "Note on some possible historical representations of original sin." But there are copies of this floating around now, and there was so of course this gets to the Vatican. Or no, it wasn't originally the Vatican, but it was, I guess, the head of the Jesuit order.
It would go up through the order first. Yeah,
it went through the order, and he was then through back and forth was asked to sign the 6 propositions
Yeah.
which I
We
couldn't
should.
find a copy of, but
Right.
they are out there. So if
Right.
any of our listeners finds them, please send it to us. But because
We
I
should.
can find summaries of them in various essays. But
We should do a backfill bit. He from childhood he was fascinated with the fossil record, uh, and grew up being encouraged by his father to study science, and his mother was a devout
hey, Bill, for
Catholic.
the record, since childhood, I was fascinated with the Flintstones. Okay,
There
so
we go.
I
There we
mean, I'm
are.
almost the same guy.
There we go. Every time I talk to you, I go
Chardin. I mean,
our
it's like
Chardin.
yeah, our Chardin. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's why I'm in exile.
Yeah, our Chardin. Well, so he really he married his two loves. He took holy orders and continued to study paleontology, and was a first rate was a creative theological thinker as well, and a deeply spiritual. His I've read his mystical work. I think that's probably I've read excerpts of the other stuff, but I've read his mystical works. They're beautiful. He was a deeply devout man. But at any rate, long story short, he got in trouble. They did not like his answers, and they asked him to clarify. And I guess the thing that gave him what he got the most trouble for was his lack of belief in a literal Adam and Eve, and that
Yes, he says there's for as far as Adam was, he says we have to make a distinction between the dogmatic attributes of the first transgression and the external circumstances in which this transgression was committed. And he goes on to expound that there is no acceptable place for Adam, and still less in our historical picture for the earthly paradise. We must so enlarge our views about original sin that we will no longer be able to situate it either here or there around us, but rather that we will know only that it is everywhere, as intertwined with the being of the world as is the God who created us and the incarnate Word who redeems us.
Yeah.
Now, this is a popular view, right? That you could find echoes of this later in Reinhold Niebuhr and Karl Barth and the so-called neo-orthodox. I mean, that's not a great term for many reasons, but you could this becomes in American Protestant or in European and American Protestant theology, not a very controversial view, but it is in the early 20th century Catholic circles that Teilhard de Chardin, who we'll call Chardin for short.
Yeah, you also sent an article that kind of you forget what the intellectual state of Catholicism was during that period. But I love the quote, the article you sent, a recent article by Molly Worthen, dumbed down Catholicism was a disaster. And it really was. As was dumbed down Christianity in any form is a disaster.
Well, you know, it's funny, that article she's
including the current expressions of it.
She's talking about Bishop Barron in that episode, who recently did a podcast with Tom Holland, who you're reading right now.
Yeah, right.
And Bishop Barron is certainly an exception to that dumbed down Catholicism. Very, very bright guy, and he's got that kind of American winsome Catholic media personality.
Well, I think the kind of biblical scholarship that came out from Catholicism post World War II, the kind of you've had the last three popes, including the current one, you can hardly accuse them of being dumbed down at all. They're highly intelligent, and Ratzinger is arguably one of the best Catholic theologians of the last couple of years.
Had he been allowed to retire to Bavaria to write books, which he asked John Paul multiple times, and John Paul would not let him do it, he would have gone down as it would have gone kind of Rahner von Balthasar Ratzinger. He would have been that big. And he still is huge. I mean, look, he still made a huge contribution.
Matter of fact, they were gifts from you. I still consult his books on Jesus.
Amazing. Anybody that wants to, great gospel resources.
And Ratzinger hardly was ever accused of being a progressive.
No,
but if you want to see a synthesis of critical scholarship and faith, read him, because
And he's German, so he knows everything.
He knows everything. The Germans know everything.
He's in the footnote, and he'll tell you too. And he doesn't fail to give you the footnotes on stuff.
I'm thankful that I studied at Princeton with the great Gottfried Froelich. It probably is ultimately a grace that I was planning on doing doctoral work with him, and he retired. That probably ultimately was a grace, because to have a German scholar of his magnitude as your academic advisor, that would have been challenging. Yeah.
So his views here are interesting, because even at this point, there are the official Catholic teaching, I think, at this point, is that the sacred writers don't give us penetrating insights into the mysteries of the visible world, right? So they can't tell you scientific method, right? So they're not going to give you actual views on the mechanistic workings of creation, of biology or physics or that sort of stuff. But you get into stickiness here, because there's still some sense in which the sacred histories are histories.
Right.
And so Chardin is saying that based on what we know scientifically, I can't affirm the history. I cannot say that
affirm the history of Genesis 1, 2, and
right, 3. Original sin. I don't even think he even mentions the flood in one quote I came across.
Well, right, the first 12, yeah, the first 12,
first 11 chapters.
First 11 chapters are problematic, whatever, regardless, right? Yeah,
right.
if you're trying to have a current scientific view, and you are a literalist or an inerrantist, it's.
And who writes 11 chapters without putting in Gilgamesh somewhere? Come on, he's huge.
It's kind of there. It's kind of there.
Yeah, it's there, but it shouldn't. It's appropriated. You know, I like my Gilgamesh. I like my Gilgamesh not captured.
Not captured. You like your gods stupid.
I like my Gilgamesh not falling asleep.
I love the gods. Yeah, the gods that are okay. They're mad at humanity for the lack of quality of sacrifices, and they're going to kill them all. And then they realize, whoa.
Who's going to give us this?
Who's going to give us?
we got rid of the supply chain. That's what's going to happen when we have no immigrants and there's no food at the grocery store.
That's the House of Representatives right there in the synopsis. Yeah. If you want insight into the current House of Representatives, read the Gilgamesh epic. It's all there.
That would make Mike Johnson a far greater hero than he's a survivor. He's evolutionarily.
Well, yeah, a guy who might think the world's only 6,000 years old will be in the number 3 position for the presidency. That's America, man.
He's a step above Jim Jordan, and that is not disputable.
Well, I guess it's a different evolutionary line. When I see Jim Jordan, I think of our poor Neanderthal cousins who didn't make it.
Hey, look. Some of them were nice-looking beings. I mean, they were nice-looking enough to intermate with.
Apparently,
you and I are running around with some Neanderthal DNA.
Probably, a lot of us have it. Not everyone does, but some of
not everyone, but a lot of us do. A lot of our listeners have it. Some more than others.
There we go.
This is, no. So I think theologically the problem here becomes how is again. Chardin.
By the way, can I just make one more? Neanderthals may have been the better.
Oh yeah,
yeah, they may have been the more. So in other words, we still don't know what happened, and we probably because they weren't smart enough to scatter and they interbred. But it also could be that they were the gentle, they were the hunter gatherers. Kind of, they were the able to our ancestor Cain. That could be what happened.
I read once an article in Christian Scholars Review. This is, oh my gosh, has to be in the 90s, I think. And it was a paleontologist who was trying to reconcile the fossil records and basically and Genesis, and his conclusion was that largely Homo sapiens came like Cain and just eradicated everything else.
Right. It's possible. It's possible.
So
Yeah, very
his thought was that those things were
yeah. They just or they were over consuming the area, and the Neanderthals just couldn't keep up. So either way, it's kind of how we still are. So that's the original. We're talking about original sin. Yeah, our species, the original sin. There's just not enough for everyone to go around. So we're going to wipe out the rest of you who don't look quite like us.
I like my primates kind of violent. I like my prehistoric people not hunter-gatherer, not gatherers.
Yeah,
Hunters, not gatherers. So here you have this sense in which, okay, the way that the Christian narrative is, and again, I say Christian because Colin Gunton, great theologian, said, the problem with Christianity evolution isn't the Bible, it's the Platonism. So what you have through a sort of Platonic, both pre and post Augustinian lens on this stuff, but Augustine certainly, is the Mac daddy of the Mac of the Platonist interpreters of the text. That largely what you have is a golden age. Is that what we have in human origins is a creation that is bereft of things like death, disease, decay, sin, like both moral or what we would call natural evil,
right.
And that the Adamic transgression, the fall, the eating of the forbidden fruit leads to an exile, not just from Eden, but a real change in the created state, where now you have death, decay, predatory behavior among animals, that bloodshed and violence and finitude and mortality all are a result of the fall, and that these things wouldn't have occurred had there not been a lapse from the golden age.
Which, in all fairness, is kind of a meditation on the text. The text says all that stuff, but it's interesting. Augustine was hardly interested at all in the literal meaning of the text.
That's why it's funny. It's called the literal church.
Well, yeah, his literal commentary on one of the funniest things when you pick up his literal commentary on Genesis, you go, "What happened?" He had a very different understanding of literal, but the real meaning behind it. And again, you even from a Platonic perspective, when the Hebrew Bible says and translated into Greek and Latin that it was very good, that you have a philosophical, you have a Platonic understanding of what good is. It's this kind of, it absolutizes everything. So yeah, it's an imposition on the text by Christians, and Genesis, that whole story was more important in many ways to Christians than Jews anyway, in part because who they were arguing with. The idea that they are arguing on one level the goodness of creation. It's kind of the irony of it all. It becomes really important because, as opposed to the pagan worldview and then the Gnostics, no, creation was a good. So then, if it was good, how did we get here? And that's kind of how you, an idea that we all would affirm, or not all of us, but most of us would affirm the goodness of the material world. It's not an evil. If creation was not a mistake, it was not a fall, but you still need to have an explanation for why things are the way they are, and that's how we get there from that. And it's also it's a bigger deal in the West than it is in the East. It's not that the East doesn't believe in some kind of primal sin, right, or that we're all sinful, but they read the Genesis account, in a very different lens. This isn't some sort of huge fall from perfection. It's more of an adolescent mistake, which I think, any of you have had kids, if you want something bad to happen, whatever you do is leave the house and say, whatever you do, don't do that. And, you can guarantee that's probably going to happen. So,
yeah. And this is Irenaeus's view, right?
Right.
That even if there was no fall, there still would have been maturation, mistakes, development, that humanity would have to undergo a pedagogical process to maturity, right? And that and that the fall affects the process, but it still would have been a process where you do get the sense in Augustine and subsequent hermeneutical traditions
and Calvin, certainly in Calvinism, right?
Yeah, that there wouldn't be a process, right? That the process is sort of a result of of the fall, right?
Right. Even to the point
Without, yeah,
where God planned it, right?
blessed sin, leads to even more blessed redemption, right? This is so I think the question becomes,
Yeah.
we, assuming that we're not going with Ken Ham and the Louisville, our Louisville Laps, let's call them our Louisville Lapsarians.
Yeah, Louisville Lapsarians. Yeah.
Yeah, which is, I think that's neat. I'd like
Not to be confused with John Hamm, who we will hang out with.
John Hamm, absolutely. Yeah. We, that would be really cool if our listeners, we could do a meetup and do a live broadcast from the Creation Museum. I think that would be very, very cool. I would be into that. I'm into that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think part of the problem that I think is not adequately addressed, for instance, in say Niebuhr or even Barth, if we go with Chardin, how do we not have a creation that's inherently flawed, right? And so redemption isn't about the healing of creation, but the escape from creation, right? This is the perennial Gnostic turn, that the creation is something not to be redeemed, but to be escaped from. And redemption is not there's not a recapitulation to it, but actually just a rescue from what is inherently flawed and not good in some sense.
Well, but it never says it. It can still be very good, and contingent, right? It doesn't have. I mean, again, in the Eastern Church, the problem is not only sin, but it's the problem of mortality and creatureliness. So there's a sense where it doesn't have to be. You don't have to read Genesis 1 as that God created a perfect world. It was complete. It was good. It was very good once humanity was added to it. But nowhere do I see the word perfect.
Yeah, well, I think the problem comes in when everything at the armchair level, when we talk as believers, we attribute death, disease, natural evil, all these things. We tend to attribute it to the fall, right? And so that becomes the sort of default on the ground mythology that everybody inhabits. So then I think what happens is, then when you start to think about it, you backpedal and say, whoa. I mean, of course, we say that, but we don't mean it. And that's what I think is the problem. Because I think what you're saying, though, is, this is how I would phrase it, is that creation's goodness doesn't lie in its perfection, but in its perfectibility. That it's the place where the lion eventually can lay down with the lamb. It doesn't have to be that at the start to be the place where that can happen. It's the theater, as Calvin would say, the theater of God's glory, right? It's the place where hope, resilience, harmony, as Chardin would say, the new sphere, where love can be the animating presence. And so we get these pictures in the Hebrew Bible and the book of Revelation of the telos of creation being a place of harmony. And it's so funny that I think there's no better witness to these prophetic hopes than animal videos that you see on Facebook now, where you see you'll see a duck and a dog or something, right? And I've had pit bulls that would love to kill a duck and things like that. And you see these
your pit bulls would love to have killed me.
Killed you, yeah. Well, I mean, some of our listeners would too, but who can account for taste? But this sense of you see these animals that don't know there's enmity. I saw this one great video of this bear and this tiger cub that wrestled so intensely they separated them at first, and they were so depressed neither of them would eat, and now they're best friends. This tiger and this bear, they're inseparable. They spent all their days at this animal refuge, and they don't know that they're not of the same species. They don't know. And so I think that would be Chardin's sense would be, I mean, I think if we were trying to say where this is harmonizable with orthodoxy, is that there is this perfectibility at the start, and then human sin takes that path awry, but it's not perfect to begin with. Even without sin, it's still rough around the edges. It's a fixer-upper.
It is a fixer-upper, right? But it's good, and I think there's a sense where, but I think often when we get in trouble, whether it be with human relationships or institutions, we impose this idea of perfection that apparently, and we attribute it to God, but God never seems to espouse it, right? Because God chose a flawed church from the beginning. God was quite content to pick some impulsive fishermen, uh, a guy who's willing to kill other people for the faith, and these become the early
You always
pillars of
need a few of those, Bill.
yeah,
I mean,
a few
come
of
on.
those. But I think, yeah, I do think there's a sense where I just lost his name. Ron Williams, his book Tokens of Trust, says that, and he says resurrection, but I think he was the whole incarnation. Since we're coming up on Epiphany, incarnation, life, death, resurrection of Christ is like a second Big Bang. It's that cosmic significance. And so there's a sense where that if you can see that the incarnation, the coming of Christ, is the second movement, the second act of creation. And that creation language is there, right? It's all over the place, right? The John 1 passage, some of you will be reading John 1 this week. It literally coming of Christ is used in the creation, Genesis 1 is appropriated there. The other thing is it's important for us, I think, and I think Chardin would agree with this, that, the star, following the star, natural observation, science can get you to Jerusalem, like the Magi. But it takes grace and revelation to get you to Jesus, right? And I think I think he understood that. Again, it doesn't mean
Bill, do you think the Magi had to qualify and say, look, these gifts are for your birthday and Christmas?
Yes, I've seen that meme. Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what? In the early church, they all ran together, right? Nativity and Epiphany, and they, part of our dating issue also is around. We don't really know when it happened, but two, it was liturgically created. So
I mean, and what do you think Mary and Joseph were thinking? Who tries to get a hotel room at Christmas in the Holy Land?
there we go.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, no one would want a hotel room in Bethlehem now, tragically.
No.
And that we won't go there. So anyway,
but I think this is, in some sense, right? Protology is interesting, and origins are interesting, largely because, I mean, we have a historic faith, so we're interested in a God that acts on the ground and gets his hands dirty. You have a great sermon, The God with Dirty Hands. I remember I listened to. We need that, and yet, really, it's all about eschatology, right? The Bible is concerned less with where we've been and more with where we're going, right? That we're on a journey, we're on the way, and origins are important because our stories always have a beginning, but really the energy is in where we're going, and in where the Creator is still leading us and taking us to this very day, and in a continued creating active story.
Amen. So we think Chardin is somebody worth looking at. So
thanks, everybody.
Yeah, take care.
A blessed Epiphany.
Absolutely.